What if the moment Germany truly lost the war wasn't in the sky over Berlin or on a beach in Normandy, but on a quiet runway in occupied France when a single engineer looked at an enemy airplane and the numbers felt like a death sentence? Occupied France, August 1943. It's the kind of dawn that looks colorless even when you're staring straight at it. Mist clinging low, the horizon smeared into gray, the smell of wet grass and fuel soaking into your clothes. On a remote Luftwaffe airfield, the night shift is ending and the day shift is beginning, but the atmosphere is wrong. Too many men are awake. Too many eyes are turned toward the hard stand. Because sitting there, under the dim blue of early morning, there's an American fighter. Forced down, pilot captured, airframe mostly intact. A P-47 Thunderbolt. To the Luftwaffe, it should feel like a gift, not just a prize, intelligence, a chance to touch the enemy's secrets with your own hands. And that's why he's here. Oberlieutenant Werner Schultz arrives not as a celebrated ace, but as a technician with a notebook. His background isn't in duels and victories, it's in measurements, tolerances, metallurgical charts. He's the kind of man who trusts what metal says more than what people claim. And as he steps onto the tarmac, he hears the same comment he's heard for months from pilots coming home angry and confused. This thing is grotesque. They're not wrong, at least not at first glance. The P-47 looks like a flying barrel, too thick, too round, too heavy to be real. German pilots mock it with nicknames, flying milk bottle, jug, because its profile looks like a common milk jug, an object from civilian life awkwardly turned into a weapon. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Schultz studies it in silence. He has seen beautiful machines. He has worked around German aircraft that look like they were designed by sculptors. Sleek lines, tight cowls, lightweight philosophies, everything trimmed down to the minimum. But this American fighter doesn't look trimmed down at all. It looks like it was designed with a completely different assumption. Not, how do we make it just barely strong enough, but how do we make it strong enough to survive the way war actually behaves? Schultz doesn't smile. He doesn't sneer. He circles the aircraft like a surgeon. He watches the skin panels, the rivet lines, the way the seams are finished. He thinks about how long a panel like that takes to manufacture. He thinks about what kind of factory rhythm creates uniformity again and again without the hands getting sloppy. He kneels near a section of damage where cannon shells have torn through aluminum. He runs his fingers near the bent edges, the torn metal fibers. He sees thickness, strength, redundancy. Then he looks up at the nose, and he already knows. If you can afford an airplane this big, you can afford a kind of war Germany is starting to lose. They remove the cowling, and the talk dies immediately. Inside sits an engine that doesn't just power the aircraft, it explains it. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. 18 cylinders in 2 rows, air-cooled muscle, built not only for power, but for reliability, produced in enormous numbers across the war years, over 125,000 units. Schultz doesn't gasp like a pilot. He stares like a man reading an obituary, because the first thing he notices isn't horsepower, it's finish. Machining that looks effortless, components that meet with confidence, surfaces that are consistent, parts that fit as if the entire factory is calibrated like a single instrument. He leans in, he examines the cylinders, he checks access points, he looks for the signs he expects to find by 1943 in German equipment, compromises, substitutions, expedients, anything that suggests shortage. But what he sees is something worse. He sees abundance. One of his mechanics points out something deceptively simple, something that changes how a war feels on the ground. Look, each cylinder is individually removable. It's a maintenance philosophy, a repair philosophy, a tempo philosophy. If a cylinder is damaged, you swap it. You don't rebuild the world. You don't ground the aircraft for an eternity. Schultz nods slowly, but it isn't admiration anymore. It's dread. Because maintenance speed isn't glamorous. It doesn't appear in heroic paintings, but it wins wars. He writes a note in his book. Not poetic, not emotional, just a fact. Design assumes frequent repairs, designed for efficiency in the field. Then he sees it. The real secret isn't just in the engine. It's in the belly and spine of the aircraft, the plumbing, the ducting, the layout that makes the P-47 look fat. The turbo supercharger system. This isn't just a supercharger bolted to the engine. It's a network that routes exhaust gases back through the fuselage to drive a turbine, energy recovered, compressed air forced back to the engine. A system that makes the P-47 keep its power at high altitude where other fighters start to suffocate. The P-47's turbo supercharger is explicitly described as central to its high-altitude dominance. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Schultz has read about turbos. German engineers have experimented with them. But seeing a working turbo system on a mass-produced fighter is different from reading a report. Because a turbo system is not just engineering. It is metallurgy. It is bearings that survive insane RPM. It is ducting that survives heat cycles and vibration without cracking. It is quality control strong enough to keep thousands of units from failing in the field. Schultz traces the route with his eyes and imagines the manufacturing chain required to make it routine. He does a calculation. Then he does it again. And somewhere in his chest, something tightens, because he realizes the P-47 is not merely an aircraft. It is proof that America is fighting a war Germany cannot copy. His assistant asks the obvious question, quietly, like a prayer. Can we replicate this system? Schultz doesn't look up. Not with our current manufacturing capacity. He pauses, then adds the more devastating truth. Not at scale. And that phrase, at scale, hangs in the air like the first crack of thunder. Because any nation can build a miracle once, but only one kind of nation can build it 10,000 times. He moves along the airframe next to see if perhaps the Americans paid for this complexity with weakness elsewhere. He finds the opposite. The P-47 has damage, real damage, cannon hits, shrapnel cuts, bullet holes that would have turned a lighter fighter into a falling torch. Yet it came down under control. He studies internal framing, heavy gauge structure, not delicate. Over-engineered, someone mutters. Schultz answers almost gently. Yes, and they can afford it. That's the difference. Germany has to optimize, trim weight, squeeze performance from limited power and limited materials. America can add armor, add redundancy, add thickness, and then simply attach more power until it doesn't matter. And the P-47 is the physical embodiment of that. He steps into the cockpit area. He examines armor plates and the heavy windscreen. He thinks about what this does to pilot survivability. He thinks about morale. He thinks about experience. Because the war in the air isn't just machines. It's human beings who survive long enough to become good. Then he reaches the wings. 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 per wing. Schultz calculates the ammunition load and rate of fire. He imagines the cone of metal, the wall of lead German pilots have described with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The P-47's 8.50 caliber guns are a defining feature. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. He writes another note. Avoid head-on engagement. Survival probability minimal. And now the pattern becomes clear. The engine speaks of industrial mastery. Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp. The turbo system speaks of advanced materials and repeatable precision. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The airframe speaks of abundance, aluminum, labor hours, and a willingness to spend weight for survival. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The guns speak of munitions output and logistics that can feed them. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Any one of those would strain Germany. This aircraft has all of them, integrated, and appears in the sky in growing numbers. Schultz requests production figures through intelligence channels. When the information comes in, it doesn't feel like data, it feels like a burial. By war's end, over 15,000 P-47s will be produced. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Schultz doesn't know the final number yet in 1943, but he senses the direction of the curve. He sees the implication. A weapon like this is not a boutique, it is a flood. He runs the numbers. Then he sits at his desk and stares at his own pencil marks like they've betrayed him. Because he isn't discovering that the P-47 is better, he is discovering that the enemy is bigger. And in the kind of war now being fought over Europe, bigger isn't just louder. Bigger is destiny. He compiles his report. He chooses careful language. In Germany, careful language can be the difference between a career and a prison cell, or worse. But he cannot escape the conclusion. The P-47 represents an industrial sophistication beyond Germany's current capacity. Continued attrition against a numerically and technically superior force will create losses Germany cannot sustain. In plain words, we can't win this by fighting the same way. And this is where we zoom out, because that airfield scene isn't just about one airplane. It's about what 1943 has become. A year where the war stops being a contest of daring and becomes a contest of production. A war of machine tools and aluminum tonnage. A war of fuel and trained hands. A war of replacement rates. A war where the sky itself is shaped by factories. And to understand why Schultz's notebook felt like doom, we need to understand what the Luftwaffe is facing in 1943, what it has already spent, and what it cannot get back. In the early war years, the German air power feels unstoppable. Fast victories, bold raids, aircraft that looked like they were forged out of speed itself. But by 1943, the Luftwaffe is trapped in a problem it cannot solve with courage, because the mission has changed. It isn't about winning a local battle over a front line. It's about intercepting bomber streams day after day at altitudes that grind engines and lungs. It's about defending factories, rail yards, refineries, the organs of the Reich. And it is about doing this while the Reich is itself under pressure from bombing, shortages, and the slow erosion of skilled labor. The air war is no longer a duel, it is a schedule, and the Luftwaffe is falling behind on it. The pilots feel it first, not in speeches, but in the way their squadrons look after a month of fighting. Empty chairs at breakfast, fewer veterans to teach the new boys, more aircraft grounded for maintenance, more rushed repairs, more time spent moving units, dispersing, hiding from raids. By 1943, the Luftwaffe is not merely fighting Americans and British in the air. It is fighting time. And time is something industrial capacity can buy. America is buying a lot of it. The United States produces roughly 300,000 aircraft by war's end, an output that dwarfs pre-war imagination. United States aircraft production during World War II. Schultz doesn't need the final totals to understand what's happening. He just needs to see the P-47 and realize this level of complexity, produced in this quantity, means the enemy is building a world inside the war that Germany cannot bomb away fast enough. And now, the story becomes a documentary about two systems colliding. Germany, brilliant engineering, constrained resources, increasingly brittle manufacturing, ideology fighting reality. America, massive industrial mobilization, repeatable quality, logistical oceans, and a design philosophy that assumes the war will be long and plans accordingly. Schultz's captured Thunderbolt is the perfect lens for this collision because it contains the whole argument in one airframe. So we go deeper, system by system, until the viewer can feel why an engineer would look at an airplane and see national defeat. Let's start with the part everyone sees, the shape. The P-47 is big, one of the heaviest single-engine fighters of the war, reaching up to 8 tons fully loaded, Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. But the size isn't vanity, it's packaging. The aircraft is built around an 18-cylinder radial that can deliver around 2,000 horsepower in early configurations, and later variants climb higher, Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. But more important, it is built around turbo machinery and ductwork that make it a high-altitude predator. In the thin air above 25,000 feet, this matters, because bomber streams live high. Interception happens high. That's where the war's daily grinding occurs. And the P-47 is happiest there. Not elegant, not nimble in a knife fight the way some lighter aircraft can be, but fast, stable, and brutally capable at altitude, especially when it has room to dive. Then there's survivability. The P-47 is noted for its ability to remain airworthy with battle damage, Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. That line reads like a footnote until you imagine what it means in human terms. It means pilots come back. It means experience accumulates. It means squadrons keep their veterans longer. It means training is reinforced with living examples, not memorial services. That changes the psychological texture of the war. And then the guns. 850s turn the aircraft into something that doesn't need perfect marksmanship. It needs presence. It needs a moment where you can put the enemy inside a cone and press the trigger. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Schultz, looking at those guns, is seeing ammunition plants, supply lines, and the ability to burn through thousands of rounds without collapsing the economy. The aircraft is a system. And the system implies the existence of a bigger system behind it, which is why he is shaken, because by 1943, Germany is not losing to one aircraft. Germany is losing to what that aircraft proves exists. Engines are not only machines. In wartime, engines are national promises. The R-2800 Double Wasp will be produced in enormous quantities, 125,334, Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp. And this isn't just a plane factory story. The engine's production numbers imply a supply chain, aluminum alloys, steel, machining capacity, skilled labor, inspection standards, spread across industries. It implies a nation that can do precision manufacturing as a routine, not a miracle. Schultz is holding that reality in his hands. Every smooth surface says we have time, we have tools, we have material, we have standardization. And he compares it, inevitably, to the condition of German manufacturing by 1943. Harder choices, thinner margins, more improvisation. Even if Germany builds excellent machines, it increasingly builds them under strain. America builds them under momentum. And momentum, once established, is terrifying. Schultz understands that the war has entered a phase where the ability to replace losses matters more than the ability to win a single engagement, because the enemy will be back tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. If you want one symbol of the industrial gap, it's the turbo system, because turbos are the kind of technology that punishes almost. Almost good bearings die. Almost good heat treatment cracks. Almost good quality control becomes field failures. The P-47's very shape is influenced by its complicated turbo supercharger ductwork. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. In simple terms, the P-47 is fat because it carries an industrial advantage inside its body. And that advantage shows up where it matters most, high altitude, where bomber interception and escort happen. Schultz sees the ducting and doesn't just think, we need this technology. He thinks, we need the entire ecosystem that makes this technology reproducible. This is where ideology fails, because you can't order a metallurgical supply chain into existence with a speech. You can't manufacture bearings with passion. You can't replace skilled machinists with slogans. The turbo system is a machine that demands a society capable of feeding it, and America can. The P-47's reputation as a rugged aircraft is not an accident. It's a design choice. Even Wikipedia's description emphasizes its ability to remain airworthy despite damage. This is where Schultz's over-engineered conversation becomes essential. German fighters, in broad strokes, often prioritize performance, climb, agility, fighting at the edge. American aircraft frequently accept weight penalties if it buys survivability and ease of operation. The P-47 embodies that: armor, thick structure, radio engine toughness, and redundancy. And when you combine that durability with the fact that America can produce massive numbers of aircraft, you get a horrifying equation. More planes enter combat, more pilots survive combat, more experience accumulates. Losses are replaced quickly. Tempo stays high. Pressure never ends. In such a system, bravery matters, but it is being asked to carry more than bravery can hold. 8.50 caliber guns. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. That decision alone tells you something about the American approach. It's not that American pilots cannot aim. It's that America is engineering towards certainty. A volume of fire that reduces the role of luck. A gun package that, once harmonized, creates a dense convergence zone that can tear apart fighters, damage bombers, shred ground targets. Schultz isn't just thinking about aerial duels. He's thinking about what happens when thousands of these aircraft start doing ground attack, strafing rail yards, trucks, airfields, turning the entire transportation network into a killing field. The P-47 isn't only a fighter, it's a mobile industrial pressure tool. Schultz finishes his report and sends it upward. And this is where the story stops being about aircraft and becomes about regimes, because regimes don't just fight enemies. They fight information. His commanding officer warns him in that quiet way people warn you when they're afraid for your future. Berlin won't like this. Schultz asks the question anyway, should I alter the findings? And the answer is no, because the report must be accurate. But accuracy is not always rewarded. In systems built on ideological certainty, accuracy can look like sabotage. Schultz's report moves upward, and somewhere up that chain, someone reads it and feels the sting of it. American engineering appears crude in propaganda, but this aircraft is not crude. It is precise, powerful, Repairable, durable, and mass-producible, that last word is the most dangerous, because it implies inevitability. And inevitability is poison to a regime that survives on belief. So the report is dismissed as pessimism, or filed, or no action required. And at that moment, Germany doesn't just miss an opportunity, it misses a chance to psychologically prepare for reality. After that, Schultz watches his predictions unfold. More P-47s appear. The bomber streams continue. German fighters climb and fight and return with fewer men each week. And the Americans do something Germany cannot fully match. They keep coming, not in a single decisive wave, but in a constant pressure, day after day, until the Luftwaffe becomes a force that cannot protect the Reich the way it must. This is how air superiority is achieved in real wars, not by a single ace or a single aircraft or a single day, but by a sustained, production-driven campaign that keeps the enemy in deficit. Schultz examines other captured aircraft and sees the same theme: standardization, materials, maintenance design, volume, repeatability. And the more he sees, the more he realizes the Reich is not losing because it lacks courage or cleverness. It is losing because it cannot multiply excellence fast enough. Here is the core truth Schultz is touching. A war of attrition is a war of replacement. How fast can you replace aircraft? How fast can you replace engines? How fast can you replace pilots? How fast can you replace fuel? How fast can you replace the entire idea of loss? America's aircraft production totals become a symbol of this scale. By war's end, about 300,000 aircraft. United States aircraft production during World War II. When you can do that, you can afford to learn. You can afford mistakes. You can afford to iterate. You can afford upgrades. You can afford to rotate units. You can afford to keep your pilots alive with better armor and better procedures. Germany can still build dangerous machines, but it cannot manufacture time. And time is what America is mass producing. This is where we return from statistics to skin. Because to the man in the cockpit, industrial capacity isn't a chart. It's the feeling of looking up and seeing the enemy already above you. It's the feeling of engaging one P-47, putting rounds into it, watching it absorb punishment, and then seeing it dive away only to return later, still flying. It's the feeling of we shot it, why didn't it fall? It's the feeling of your own aircraft being light, fast, precise, and fragile. It's the feeling of knowing that if you make one mistake, you burn, and of knowing that the enemy can make more mistakes and still keep coming. This is how morale breaks, not with a speech, but with repetition, when loss stops being rare and becomes normal, when replacement pilots arrive younger, less trained, when veterans disappear, when the war becomes a machine that eats experience. And in that machine, the P-47 is both a symbol and a tool. But before we push into the moment Schultz realizes his report has been buried, and what that means for the men still climbing into the sky, if you're enjoying this documentary story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these deep, human WW2 accounts. Now, here's where the story turns from grim to downright terrifying. Schultz hears it through informal channels first. Not in a letter, not in an official reply, a whisper. The report has been marked, filed, no action required. No action required is a bureaucratic phrase, but in wartime, it's a coffin, because what it really means is we will continue as we are. And continuing as you are, when the numbers are against you, is not bravery. It is suicide by routine. Schultz feels something close to rage, but he can't express it. In the Third Reich, rage in the wrong direction is dangerous. So he does what engineers do when they cannot change leadership. He tries to change procedures. He makes tactical recommendations. Avoid head-on passes. Avoid altitude fights, where the turbo-supercharged P-47 has the advantage. Use hit and run. Attack when conditions favor you. But tactics can't fix strategy. Tactics are how you survive today. Strategy is how you avoid being destroyed next year. And strategy, Germany's strategy, now includes something like denial as a pillar. Because if the leadership acknowledges the industrial gap, it must acknowledge limits, and limits are incompatible with ideological destiny. So the sky fills with machines. More P-47s, then Mustangs, then a broader Allied air armada, and the Luftwaffe bleeds out in increments. Here's the rhythm of 1943 into 1944. Interception, combat, losses, scramble, repair, shortages, more losses. And the enemy's rhythm is different. Production, delivery, training, replacement, more production. On a day when German units are exhausted, the Americans are still building tomorrow. Schultz watches squadrons change character. At first, the Germans talk about winning. Then they talk about surviving. Then they talk about fuel. Then they stop talking. Because the most dangerous moment in a unit isn't when men panic. It's when they accept that nothing they do will change the outcome. Only the manner of it. This is where the story reaches its peak. Not in a single dogfight, but in a system reaching its breaking point. Schultz's report didn't fail because it was wrong. It failed because truth has no authority in a system that prefers belief. And here is the line that makes the story stick. Schultz realizes Germany has already lost a war it didn't even know it was fighting. Not a war of pilots, not a war of tactics, not even a war of weapons exactly. A war of factories, a war of resources, a war where the side that can build complexity repeatedly and keep quality high will eventually dominate the skies and then the ground. The P-47 isn't a miracle, it's a receipt. A printed bill that says, we can afford this, and if you can afford this, you can afford to win. The P-47 goes on to become one of the most produced fighters of the Second World War, 15,636 built. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. It becomes an escort fighter early, then increasingly a fighter-bomber, because a machine that can take damage and carry payload becomes a hammer. And that legacy echoes beyond the war. The name Thunderbolt is later inherited by the A-10 Thunderbolt II, another aircraft built around survivability and brutal firepower. Meanwhile, the engine family behind it, the R-2800, becomes one of the great mass-produced power plants of its era, over 125,000 made. Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp. Schultz survives the war, and when the fighting ends, the interrogators ask him the question that sounds almost absurd, but isn't. Did you really conclude Germany would lose from examining one aircraft? Schultz's answer is calm. He didn't conclude Germany would lose every battle. He concluded Germany could not win an industrial war against a nation that could build this, and then build it again and again and again, without running out of time, metal, or skilled hands. That's the truth at the heart of the story. A single airplane sitting on a runway in occupied France becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, an engineer sees the war's outcome, not because he can predict heroism, but because he can read a supply chain. In the end, the story of the captured P-47 isn't really a story about an airplane. It's a story about reality, about a regime that tried to overpower mathematics with ideology and discovered too late that metal doesn't care what you believe. Werner Schultz, engineer, technician, observer, doesn't defeat anyone. He doesn't win a dogfight. He doesn't alter the course of history. He simply recognizes it. He recognizes that the sky over Europe is no longer decided only by pilots. It is decided by what's happening thousands of miles away, inside factories, inside foundries, inside training bases, inside logistics depots, where replacement is not a hope, but a plan. And the moment he understands that, the P-47 stops being grotesque. It becomes a prophecy. Because it proves that Germany isn't being beaten by a single weapon. Germany is being buried under an avalanche of production. And once an avalanche starts, you don't argue with it. You don't negotiate with it. You either escape it or you disappear beneath it. So let me ask you, if you were Schultz, holding proof your nation can't win, and knowing that telling the truth could destroy your career or your life, would you still write the report, or would you stay silent? Tell me in the comments. And if this story gave you that cold, heavy feeling only real history can give you, hit like. Share it with someone who lives for WWII documentaries, and I'll see you in the next one. Because the past doesn't just speak, it leaves evidence.